Olivia looked out her office window at the city below. She was used to being in control, but for the first time in years she felt that control slipping away. The latest death threat had arrived that morning, more detailed than the others. Her hands still shook as she held the paper in her grip. A knock at her door made her turn. Mark, her head of operations, stood there with a tall man she had never seen before. "Olivia, this is James Miller. The board has hired him as your personal security." James stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. He was tall with broad shoulders and a face that seemed carved from stone. His short brown hair was neat, and his blue eyes were watchful. He wore a simple dark suit that did little to hide his athletic build. "I don't need a babysitter," Olivia said, her voice sharper than she intended. "With respect, Ms. Reed, I'm not here to babysit you. I'm here to keep you alive." His voice was deep and calm. Mark looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted." He closed the door behind him. "The threats aren't serious," Olivia said, turning back to the window. "People make threats all the time when you're in my position." James picked up the letter she had left on her desk. "This isn't a typical threat. This person knows your schedule, your home address, and details about your security system." He placed the letter down. "They're watching you." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine, but refused to show it. "And you think following me around will help?" "Yes." His simple answer irritated her. "I've worked too hard to get where I am. I won't live in fear, and I won't have someone shadowing my every move." James didn't argue. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out. Nice view. Easy sight lines from the building across the street, though. Olivia rolled her eyes. "Are you always this cheerful?" For the first time, his expression softened slightly. "Only on my good days." Despite herself, Olivia felt a smile tug at her lips. She quickly suppressed it. "How is this going to work?" "I'll be with you during all public appearances. I'll drive you to and from work. I'll need to check your home and set up additional security measures there." "That's ridiculous. What about my privacy?" "You won't have any privacy if you're dead, Ms. Reed." His bluntness caught her off guard. She studied him more carefully. There was something in his eyes, a depth of experience that told her he had seen things most people hadn't. "Fine, but there are boundaries. You don't enter my bedroom, my bathroom, or my private office without permission." "Agreed, unless I believe your life is in immediate danger." She sighed. "How long will this last?" "Until we find who's threatening you." Later that evening, James drove Olivia home. The silence in the car was tense. She watched his hands on the steering wheel, noticing a scar that ran across his right knuckles. "How did you get that?" she asked, nodding toward his hand. He glanced down briefly. "Afghanistan, second tour. You were in the military?" "Special Forces, 8 years." She wanted to ask more but didn't. When they arrived at her building, he insisted on checking her apartment before letting her enter. "All clear," he said after a thorough inspection. "I'll be outside your door tonight. You're going to stand there all night?" "It's my job, Ms. Reed. Call me Olivia. If you're going to invade my life, we might as well be on a first-name basis." He nodded. "James." As she closed the door, Olivia leaned against it, feeling strangely unsettled. She was used to being surrounded by people who wanted something from her money, her connections, her company. But James was different. He seemed to want nothing but to keep her safe. She didn't know why, but that unsettled her most of all. 3 weeks passed with James as Olivia's shadow. At first, his constant presence felt like an invasion, but slowly she grew used to him. He was always there, a step behind her, eyes alert and watchful. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat in her living room. Rain pounded against the windows, and the city lights blurred through the wet glass. James had finally agreed to come inside rather than stand guard in the hallway. "You never talk about yourself," Olivia said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to James, who hesitated before taking it. "I'm on duty," he said. "1 glass won't hurt, and I think we both need it after today." He accepted the glass but only took a small sip. "There's not much to tell." "I doubt that." Olivia sat across from him, curling her legs beneath her. Without her usual business attire and simple jeans and a soft sweater, she looked different. More real. James studied her for a moment. "What do you want to know?" Why did you leave the military? His jaw tightened slightly. Lost my team in an ambush. I was the only one who made it out. Olivia hadn't expected such honesty. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Is that why you became a bodyguard? To protect people? James looked down at his glass. Something like that. It's what I'm good at. Thunder crashed outside and the lights flickered. Olivia jumped slightly and James was instantly alert, his hand moving toward his weapon. Just the storm, she said with a small laugh, embarrassed by her reaction. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Olivia found herself noticing the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, how his eyes weren't just blue but had flecks of gray in them. The lights went out completely, plunging the apartment into darkness. Stay where you are, James said, his voice calm and professional again. She heard him move through the dark room with surprising ease. A moment later, the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness. Power's out in the whole building, he said, returning to the living room. Probably the storm. The flashlight cast strange shadows across his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and cheekbones. Olivia felt a strange flutter in her chest. Do you have candles? He asked. She nodded and led him to the kitchen, aware of how close he stayed behind her. As she reached for the top shelf where she kept emergency supplies, her sweater rode up, exposing a small section of skin at her lower back. She felt James's eyes on her and a warmth spread through her body that had nothing to do with the wine. They lit candles around the living room, creating pools of golden light. The tension between them had shifted into something else, something that made Olivia's skin tingle whenever James moved close to her. Tell me about your work, he said, breaking the silence. The software you're developing, it seems important to you. Olivia was surprised by his question. Most men she knew never asked about her work. It is. 3 years ago, my sister was stalked by an ex-boyfriend. He used spyware to track everything she did online. The police couldn't do anything until he hurt her. James' expression darkened. I'm sorry. She recovered. But I promised myself I'd create something that would make that kind of invasion impossible. She looked up at him. That's why these threats don't scare me. I've seen what happens when the wrong people have power over others. James moved closer, sitting beside her on the couch. That's why you need to be careful. Your work matters. The candles cast a warm glow on his face, softening his features. Olivia found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding. Their fingers brushed as she reached for her wineglass, and neither pulled away. The storm raged outside, but in that moment, with the candlelight flickering around them, Olivia felt safer than she had in years. The charity gala was in full swing. Olivia wore a red dress that clung to her curves, her hair pinned up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. James stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, but no less alert. His eyes constantly scanned the room, watching for any sign of trouble. You could try to look like you're enjoying yourself, Olivia said, appearing at his side with 2 champagne flutes. She offered one to him. I'm working, he reminded her, but took the glass anyway. And you shouldn't be bringing me drinks. I'm supposed to be invisible. Hard for you to be invisible looking like that, she said, her eyes traveling over him. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, highlighting his broad shoulders and trim waist. A slight flush colored his cheeks. Ms. Reed. Olivia, she corrected, and it was a compliment. The weeks of living in each other's space had created a tension between them that was becoming harder to ignore. Olivia found herself looking for excuses to touch him, a hand on his arm, fingers brushing as she passed him coffee in the morning. Dance with me, she said suddenly. That's not a good idea. One dance won't kill you. She placed her glass on a passing waiter's tray. Besides, you can keep an eye on the room better from the dance floor. James hesitated, then set his glass down. One dance. He led her onto the floor, placing one hand at her waist, keeping a respectful distance between them. But as the music continued, Olivia moved closer until she could feel the warmth of his body against hers. People are watching, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Let them. His hand tightened slightly at her waist, and she felt a thrill run through her. This was dangerous, not the threats against her life, but the way her heart raced when James looked at her, the way her skin burned where he touched her. As the song ended, James suddenly stiffened. his eyes fixed on something across the room. "What is it?" Olivia asked. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice tight. He began moving her toward the exit, his body shielding hers. Olivia glanced over her shoulder and saw a man pushing through the crowd, one hand reaching inside his jacket. Everything happened in a blur. James shoved her behind a pillar as the crack of a gunshot echoed through the ballroom. People screamed, dropping to the floor. James moved with shocking speed, charging the gunman. There was a struggle, another shot. Olivia watched in horror as James fell to one knee, blood blooming on his white shirt. But he didn't stop. He tackled the man to the ground, pinning him until security guards rushed in. Later in her apartment, Olivia's hands shook as she helped James out of his bloodied shirt. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, leaving an angry red line across his skin. "You need a hospital," she insisted. "It's just a scratch." He winced as she cleaned the wound with alcohol. "I've had worse. You saved my life." He looked up at her, his eyes intense. "It's my job." "Is that all it is?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James didn't answer. Instead, he reached up, his fingers tracing her cheek. The touch sent electricity through her body. "This is a bad idea," he said, but he didn't move his hand. "I know." Olivia leaned into his touch. "I don't care." Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly turned hungry. Months of tension and denial fueled their need for each other. James pulled her onto his lap, mindful of his injured shoulder, his hands exploring the curves of her body through her dress. Olivia's fingers tangled in his hair as she deepened the kiss, tasting champagne on his tongue. She felt dizzy with want, all thoughts of danger forgotten in the heat of his touch. "We shouldn't," James murmured against her throat, even as his hands slid up her thighs, pushing her dress higher. "The man who wants to kill me almost succeeded tonight," Olivia said, her breathing ragged. "Life is too short for shoulders." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. The professional barrier that had kept them apart crumbled completely as James picked her up and carried her to the bedroom, the pain in his shoulder forgotten in the need to be with her. Morning light streamed through the blinds, casting golden lines across the rumpled sheets. Olivia woke slowly, her body pleasantly sore from the night before. She reached across the bed, but found it empty. For a moment, panic gripped her. Had James regretted what happened? Then she heard movement in the kitchen, smelled coffee brewing. She slipped from bed, pulling on a silk robe before padding barefoot from the bedroom. James stood at the counter, wearing only his pants from the night before. The morning light highlighted the muscles of his back, the collection of scars that told the story of his past. He turned when he heard her, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, offering her a cup of coffee. She took it, their fingers touching. "You're still here." "Did you think I wouldn't be?" "I wasn't sure." She sipped the coffee, studying him over the rim of the cup. Professional boundaries and all that. A small smile touched his lips. "I think we crossed those boundaries thoroughly last night." Heat rose to her cheeks at the memory of his hands on her body, his mouth against her skin. "Any regrets?" "Not about last night." He set his cup down, his expression turning serious. "But I can't protect you properly if I'm distracted." "Is that what I am? A distraction?" James moved closer, his hand settling on her waist. "You know you're more than that." Olivia's heart raced as he leaned down to kiss her, slow and deep. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We need to talk about what happened at the gala," James said, his forehead resting against hers. "Someone got close enough to take a shot at you. That shouldn't have happened. You caught him. But now they know I'm here? They'll plan differently next time." He pulled away, his mind clearly shifting back to work. "I need to see what the police found out from the shooter." They spent the morning working side by side, a new intimacy between them even as they focused on the threat. James made calls to his contacts in the police department while Olivia pored over files from her company, looking for anyone who might have motive to stop her project. "The shooter isn't talking," James said, hanging up the phone. "But they found this on him." He showed her a photo of a business card with a symbol Olivia recognized immediately. "Data Core." Her voice hardened. "They're the biggest data harvesting company in the country. My software would make their business model illegal overnight." James nodded. That's what I thought. But there's more. The card had a name written on the back. Thomas Wells. Olivia stared at him. Thomas is my COO. He's been with me since the beginning. Are you sure about his loyalty? She wanted to defend Thomas immediately, but something stopped her. In recent months, he had been pushing to delay the launch of the privacy software, citing concerns about market readiness. I thought I was, she said quietly. James's hand covered hers. We need to be careful. If someone inside your company is working against you, the threat is bigger than we thought. That evening, they sat together on her couch, files spread around them. James had insisted they order in food, not wanting to risk going out after the attack. If Thomas is involved, he has access to everything, your schedule, your security, your home address, James said. Olivia leaned against him, taking comfort in his solid presence. I trusted him completely. We need proof before we confront him. James' arm tightened around her shoulders. And we need to be ready for what happens when we do. She looked up at him, studying the strong line of his jaw, the concern in his eyes. She had spent years building walls around herself, focusing only on her work. Now those walls were crumbling, and it terrified her, not just the threat to her life, but the way James had slipped past her defenses. Why are you looking at me like that? He asked. I'm just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I resented having you follow me everywhere. Now I can't imagine you not being here. He kissed her then, and Olivia forgot about the danger, about Thomas's betrayal, about everything except the feel of James's arms around her, and the certainty that whatever happened next, they would face it together. Olivia's finger hovered over the send button. The email contained all the evidence they had gathered against Thomas. Records of secret meetings with DataCore executives, suspicious transfers of company information, and emails discussing ways to delay the privacy software launch. Are you sure you want to do this? James asked, standing behind her chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. Once we confront him, there's no going back. I need to know why, she said. He was like family to me. James nodded. I'll be right outside the meeting room. The first sign of trouble, I'm coming in. 3 hours later, Olivia sat across from Thomas in the glass-walled conference room. James stood in the hallway, his eyes never leaving them. Thomas smiled as he took his seat, completely unaware of what was coming. You wanted to see me? He asked, smoothing his expensive tie. Olivia slid a folder across the table. I know, Thomas. His smile faltered as he opened the folder and saw the evidence inside. Olivia, I can explain. Explain what? How you've been selling me out to DataCore? How you were willing to let someone kill me to protect your investment? Thomas's face hardened, his friendly mask falling away. You don't understand what you're doing with this software. Do you know how many jobs will be lost? How many companies will go under? Companies that make money by stealing people's data. It's how the world works, he snapped. I tried to show you the bigger picture, but you wouldn't listen. I didn't want you hurt, just stopped. The shooter at the gala wasn't trying to stop me, he was trying to kill me. Olivia's voice shook with anger. Thomas looked away. That wasn't supposed to happen. They assured me they just wanted to scare you. Olivia stood, unable to bear sitting across from him any longer. You're fired, Thomas. Security will escort you out. The board meeting is tomorrow, and I'm bringing all of this evidence. As she turned to leave, Thomas grabbed her wrist. You're making a mistake. Through the glass wall, she saw James tense, ready to burst in. She shook her head slightly, letting him know she was okay. The only mistake I made was trusting you, she said, pulling her arm free. That night in her apartment, Olivia couldn't settle. The confrontation with Thomas had left her feeling raw and betrayed. James tried to distract her, ordering her favorite food, opening a bottle of wine, but even as they sat close on the couch, she felt distant. Talk to me, James said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He was at my sister's hospital bed after the attack, she said quietly. He brought flowers. He helped me start the company. And all this time, James pulled her into his arms. Some people are very good at pretending to be something they're not. She looked up at him. Are you? No. He kissed her gently. What you see is what you get. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, Olivia traced the scar on his shoulder from the bullet at the gala. His skin was warm under her fingertips, his breathing deep and even. I think I'm falling in love with you, she whispered, not sure if he was awake to hear it. His arm tightened around her. I think I already fell. In the early hours of the morning, Olivia's phone rang. It was her assistant, panic in her voice. Thomas cleaned out the server room, she said. All the software prototypes, the research, everything, it's gone. Olivia sat up, fully awake now. What? When? Security cameras show him entering the building at midnight with his old access card. The guards didn't stop him, they thought he still worked there. James was already up, pulling on clothes. We need to go, Abby said. Now. As they rushed to dress, Olivia's phone chimed with a text message. It was from Thomas. I'm sorry it came to this. Meet me at your lake house if you want your work back. Come alone or I delete everything. She showed the message to James, who immediately shook his head. No way. It's a trap. I have to go. Everything is on those servers. Years of work. Then I'm coming with you. His voice left no room for argument. He said to come alone. James cupped her face in his hands. After everything that's happened, do you really think I would let you face him alone? Olivia leaned into his touch. No, but be careful. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. Nothing's going to happen, he promised. We're going to get your work back, and then we're going to end this. Together. The drive to the lake house took 3 hours. Olivia spent most of it on the phone with her technical team, trying to determine how much damage Thomas had done. James drove in tense silence, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors for any sign they were being followed. There's a backup server, Olivia said, hanging up. But Thomas knew about that too. He wiped everything. James reached across the console to take her hand. We'll get it back. The lake house came into view as they rounded the final curve in the road. It sat on the edge of the water, large windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Once it had been Olivia's escape from the world. Now it felt tainted by Thomas's betrayal. Wait here, James said as he parked some distance from the house. He pulled his gun from the holster beneath his jacket. Let me check the perimeter first. Olivia nodded, watching as he moved silently through the trees surrounding the property. Her phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. I know he's with you. Send him away or the deal is off. She looked up to see James returning, his expression grim. There are at least 2 other cars hidden behind the house. He's not alone. He wants me to send you away. She showed him the text. James shook his head. Not happening. What if you let him think I did? Olivia suggested. You could circle around while I go in the front. It's too dangerous. Do you have a better idea? James was silent for a long moment. I don't like it. But if we're doing this, we need a signal. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you say the word backup, and I'm coming in. Olivia nodded. I'll get him talking, find out where the servers are. Be careful. James pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that left her breathless. I love you. It was the first time he had said it directly. Olivia's heart raced. I love you too. She walked alone up the path to the lake house, her steps heavy with dread. Thomas opened the door before she could knock. Where's your guard dog? He asked, glancing past her to the trees. I told him to wait in the car. He's not happy about it. She kept her voice neutral. Do you have my work? Thomas stepped aside to let her enter. The living room was much as she remembered it, except for the 3 men in dark clothing who stood around the space. One held a server rack that she recognized from her office. You didn't really think I'd come alone, did you? Thomas asked. I hoped you might still have some decency left. Olivia kept her eyes on the server. Is that all of it? Everything that matters. Thomas gestured to a laptop on the coffee table. The encryption keys are on there. Once you agree to our terms, you can have it all back. What terms? You shut down the privacy project. Permanently. And you sign over controlling interest in your company to Datacorp's parent corporation. Olivia laughed bitterly. You want me to give up everything I've built, in exchange for your life. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. It's a fair trade. One of the men moved closer, and Olivia noticed the gun tucked into his waistband. She needed to buy time, to find a way to alert James. I need to verify the data first, she said, moving toward the laptop. How do I know you haven't corrupted everything? Thomas nodded to one of the men, who brought the server closer. As Olivia knelt by the laptop, she heard a faint sound from outside, the crunch of gravel under a boot. What was that? Thomas asked sharply. Probably just an animal, Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady. There are a lot of deer around here. She turned on the laptop, pretending to check the files while watching Thomas from the corner of her eye. He was growing agitated, checking his watch repeatedly. We don't have time for this, he said suddenly. The helicopter will be here in 20 minutes. Helicopter. Olivia looked up. Where are you going? We're all going. To meet your new business partners. Thomas nodded to one of the men, who pulled out his gun. And if your bodyguard is out there, he's going to have company very soon. Olivia's blood ran cold. I need to check one more thing in the backup files. Enough stalling. Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. It's time to go. Back up. Olivia shouted as Thomas dragged her toward the door. The windows exploded inward as James crashed through, gun drawn. The next few moments were chaos, gunshots, shouting, the sound of breaking glass. Thomas pulled Olivia in front of him, using her as a shield. One of his men fell, then another. James moved with deadly precision, his military training evident in every motion. Drop your weapon or she dies, Thomas called out, pressing a gun to Olivia's temple. James froze, his eyes locked with Olivia's. She could see him calculating, weighing options. Let her go, he said, his voice deadly calm. This doesn't end well for you either way. Thomas laughed. I think it does. Your gun. On the floor. Now. James slowly lowered his weapon, placing it on the hardwood. In that moment of distraction, Olivia slammed her elbow into Thomas's ribs. He stumbled, his grip loosening. James lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The gun went off, the bullet splintering the wooden ceiling. Get the server. James shouted to Olivia as he wrestled with Thomas. She ran to grab it, but the remaining guard blocked her path. Outside, she heard the approaching thump of helicopter blades. They were running out of time. A shot rang out. Olivia turned to see James clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. Thomas stood over him, gun aimed at his head. No, she screamed, lunging forward. Thomas swung his arm, catching her across the face with the gun. She fell to her knees, tasting blood. The guard grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back. It's over, Thomas said. You lost. James struggled to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. Not yet. With surprising speed for an injured man, he charged forward, knocking Thomas into the wall. The gun fell from Thomas's hand, skittering across the floor. The men grappled, trading blows. Blood stained James's shirt, spreading quickly. Olivia fought against the guard's grip, finally breaking free when the sound of the helicopter distracted him. She grabbed the fallen gun and pointed it at the guard. Don't move. Outside, the helicopter was landing. More men would be coming. They needed to leave now. James, she called out. We have to go. He had Thomas pinned to the ground, but his strength was clearly fading. Blood pooled beneath him on the wooden floor. Take the server and go, James said, his voice strained with pain. I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you. Olivia kept the gun trained on the guard as she moved to help James. Listen to me. James locked eyes with her. Your work is too important. It has to survive. Not without you. Tears streamed down her face. The sound of boots on the porch told them more men had arrived. James pushed himself up, swaying slightly. Get to the boat. I'll be right behind you. Olivia hesitated, then grabbed the server. The guard made a move toward her, but James intercepted him, slamming him into the wall despite his injuries. Go, James shouted. Clutching the server to her chest, Olivia ran out the back door toward the small dock where her boat was moored. Behind her, she heard more gunshots, the sound of breaking furniture, a man's scream of pain. She had just reached the dock when a massive explosion rocked the ground beneath her feet. The force of it knocked her down, the server sliding from her grasp. Turning, she saw the lake house engulfed in flames, the roof already collapsing. James, she screamed, scrambling to her feet. She tried to run back, but the heat was too intense, the flames too high. Something caught her eye, a dark shape in the water near the shore. She ran to it, wading into the cold lake. It was James, barely conscious, his body covered in burns and blood. I told you to go, he whispered as she pulled him to shore. I couldn't leave you. She cradled his head in her lap, tears falling onto his face. Hold on. Please hold on. His hand reached up to touch her cheek. The servers. Safe. She looked over at where she had dropped them on the dock. We did it. A faint smile touched his lips. Good. His eyes closed, his hand falling limply to his side. No, no, no. Olivia shook him gently. Stay with me. Please, James. I love you. In the distance, sirens wailed. Help was coming, but Olivia feared it was already too late. She held James tightly against her, rocking back and forth, whispering promises and prayers into his unhearing ears as the lake house burned behind them, taking all evidence of Thomas's betrayal with it.